Chapter 633, West Balam. Lumion had heard from Lugano that ships deviating from the safe sea route might mysteriously disappear. In a few years, they would occasionally appear at night with no lights or people. This seemed to be the case now. In the past, Lumion might have teleported over out of curiosity, taking advantage of the three-masted sailboat's re-entry into a safe sea route to assess its internal condition. However, after encountering the demon legends on Hanth Island, he felt that less curiosity was better. As long as the uninhabited ship traveling in the darkness didn't exhibit signs of attack or an imminent danger, he could treat it as a unique spectacle of the Berserk Sea and simply observe. The brown ship gradually distanced itself, leaving only the billowing sails in its wake. Abruptly, Lumion, utilizing his exceptional vision, spotted a face silently staring out of an open hole in the cabin's uppermost window. The face, shriveled and pale white, clung tightly to the bones, devoid of flesh and blood. Flaxen-colored hair cascaded like withered weeds. The eyeballs were absent, leaving only a void of deep darkness. It resembled the head of a desiccated corpse, yet its lips were surprisingly vibrant, as if recently adorned with lipstick. Lumion instinctively sensed the face belonged to a woman. At least, she had been a woman when alive. He refrained from raising his right hand for a warm greeting. Instead, he quietly observed as the ancient three-masted sailboat sailed beyond the safe sea route and into the dark night. The desiccated face, with blood-red lips and pitch-black eyes, blended into the darkness. Only then did Lumion wave his hand and offer a faint smile. "Goodbye, you won't be missed." He then helped Franca and the others to devise a plan to confront Morin Avigny. Ultimately, he opted to await further information from Seven before finalizing their strategy. Conspirer wasn't a visionary, known for conjuring conspiracies out of thin air. They required substantial information as a foundation. When Lumion awoke at dawn, the berries emerged from the dense, death-carrying fog of the Berserk Sea. Before him stretched a clear blue sea, bathed in the intense sunlight of the high sky. The next day, the berries bypassed Barons Harbor at the northernmost tip of West Balam. Instead, they continued southwest, reaching Port Pylos by 4 p.m. Situated in Matani, the port was under the rule of Admiral Quiraril. Originally a colony of the Intis Republic, Port Pylos saw Intis colonists withdraw after the war a few years ago. Subsequently, various factions from the Phaenopoder Kingdom, maintaining a favorable relationship with Admiral Quiraril, took control. Lumion's target, Hisoka, was yet to surface in Port Pylos, but Lumion knew that the two pranks he had engaged in were in Matani. One occurred in Tizimo town, at the outskirts of Port Pylos, closest to the forest, and the other in Devise, the southernmost gold mine city in Matani. As Lumion unbuttoned the second button on his linen shirt, he remarked to Lugano in a self-deprecating tone, "I feel like I'm shunned by winter and have been living in a scorching environment." Having arrived in Port Santa during late autumn, which was relatively hot and sunny, Lumion moved on to Port Kala as Port Santa began to cool. His journey continued through what his sister called the tropics, devoid of winter and maintaining a temperature of at least around 20 degrees Celsius. While Trier was already in midwinter, the southern continent was experiencing the height of summer. This made Lumion's specially prepared black tweed coat and Jayaman-styled trench coat impractical. "Because we've been traveling south all autumn," Lugano declared authoritatively on matters of weather and seasons. Lumion donned a golden straw hat and strolled down the gangway to the port, hand in hand with Ludwig. He boldly embodied the traits of the adventurer Louis Barry. Initially, Lumion had contemplated altering his strategy, adopting a new identity to discreetly investigate the two pranks in Matani and uncover Hisoka without drawing attention. However, after Franca vividly detailed Hisoka's usual characteristics to Anthony Reed, the hypnotist's profiling revealed an exceptionally aggressive trait, ranking among the top. As a result, Lumion reconsidered and returned to his role of casting out bait. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that success was a slim possibility. The sea sacrificial ritual and Loki's survival had likely provided Hisoka with a comprehensive understanding of the factions backing him. April Fools, with its former display of resources and energy, seemed ill-equipped to challenge the might of the Tarot Club. And Lumion wasn't solely relying on the Tarot Club for support. If he were in Hisoka's shoes, Lumion would opt for patience. He'd wait a month or two, allowing the vengeful enemy to grow restless and make mistakes. When the formidable forces behind him could no longer guarantee protection, he'd launch a surprise attack. For now, let's not devise a plan. I'll consider it when I find clues, Lumion muttered to himself. Leaving the port alongside a throng of passengers, he reached the public carriage stop. Numerous rental carriages and pitch-black or vermilion coffins were parked nearby. Coffins? Despite having read many travelogue books on West Balam's customs, Lumion found it absurd to witness coffins lining the roadside. Before the invasion of the northern continent, before East and West Balam's division, the Balam Empire revered death. The emperor of the underworld from the War of the Four Emperors. Thus, the locals valued and loved coffins, considering them objects that brought peace, tranquility, and the blessing of death. When traveling, they would lie inside, carried by people or pulled by horses and single-horned goats. Of course, this form of transportation was reserved for those of a certain wealth level. Ordinary people couldn't even afford lying in a coffin. After a momentary daze, Lumion addressed Lugano and Ludwig with interest. "Do you want to take the coffin? I plan to give it a try." "I'll pass," Lugano replied, finding the idea of lying in a coffin unsettling. Ludwig shifted his attention to the nearby street vendors. The aroma of corn and potatoes intertwined, enticing every passerby and prompting increased saliva production. "How lame," Lumion teased with a smile. Approaching the four locals with disheveled black hair and dark brown skin, he raised his right hand and pointed at the pitch-black coffin beneath the shade of a tree. "How much?" Lugano inquired in fluent Dutanese before Lumion could. "How much?" Lugano inquired in fluent Dutanese before Lumion could. His linguistic talent was evident. Less than a month had passed since their departure from Port Santa to their arrival at Port Pylos, and he could already communicate with people in Dutanese. Of course, his proficiency was limited to basic words and short sentences. A half-naked local in linen pants replied in Dutanese. "Nearby 40 kapit, far away 1 virl door." Recognizing the foreigner's inquiry, he refrained from quoting the price in the local currency, delexi, the Intisian term for copper coins. Quite affordable. This coffin, carried by 4 people, should be considerably cheaper than the one carried by 8, Lumion mused, appreciating the direct use of virl door and kapit. It showcased the recent Intisian influence in the former colony, lost only a few years ago. Lumion's grasp of Dutanese surpassed Lugano's, thanks to the mid-level language comprehension charm he had used on the ship. Learning Dutanese in this manner proved more efficient. Regarding charm consumption, Lumion harbored no concerns. In his view, items served a purpose, and there was no concept of waste as long as they proved useful. He couldn't align with those miserly individuals who hoarded their wealth throughout life, only for it to benefit others after their demise. If he urgently needed language comprehension charms, he could acquire them from the curly-haired Baboons Research Society. If their gathering didn't align with his schedule, teleporting to various cities in Lenberg would allow him to purchase them from the Church of Knowledge. "Sure," Lumion nodded at Lugano and said, "Let's go to Hotel Orella." After Lugano paid 1 virl door, the local who had quoted the price lifted the thin coffin lid, revealing the interior covered with thick dark red cloth and a stiff neck pillow. Excitedly, Lumion removed his golden straw hat and lay down, immediately feeling a cooling sensation enveloping his body. In the hot season, the coffin effectively dispelled the humidity. Is it the coffin's wood or the sunscreening black paint, or perhaps the shade of the tree? It feels like stepping into a morgue in the summer, surprisingly comfortable. Lumion observed the thin coffin lid closing, witnessing the shadows rapidly expanding until they dominated his world. Outside, the voices became muffled in his ears. The coffin was lifted, swaying slightly as it moved forward. Within Lumion's view, everything was dark, and his surroundings exuded a sinister, cold ambience. For some reason, it felt like he was walking toward death, touching it. Setting aside the psychological discomfort, it isn't bad. The only downside is the tendency to easily fall asleep. Lumion evaluated the mode of transportation in a good mood. It's unsuitable for mixed-gender rides, which could be more awkward. Ha, I wonder if the romantic Intisions have ever engaged in an affair under such circumstances. Nearly half an hour later, the coffin halted in front of Hotel Orella. Lumion stepped out, finding himself in front of a small man-made valley. Rows of grayish-black stone rooms encircled the inner wall of the deep valley until reaching the bottom. This was Port Pilos's most renowned Hotel Orella. Originally belonging to a Balam royal family descendant, Orella Eggers, it had been constructed with the intent of approaching death. Later, it fell into the hands of Inti's colonists. Upon the Phanepaterians' arrival, they perceived it as a symbol of entering the earth and returning to the land, prompting its transformation into a sizable hotel.